So
there we go. Now it's recording.
Not sure what it stored, but I stopped it and now I'm restarting it, so it should be going. So I'll repeat what I just said. Basically, you know, we did a governance docs review last week. You know, Lisa had put the initial drafts up on GitHub for review. Those are still there, and comments are welcome. I think what we'll do in this stand-up today is primarily, initially what we'll do is we'll just sort of give a quick update on those. There's also been a lot of more technical updates as well to not only the runtime, but also all the underlying software and the curriculum. So I'll cover some of that stuff, and we'll just open it up to the floor for anybody else to raise issues as they will.
Yeah. So long story short on the governance doc, I mean, you guys were both on the call last week, and I did also ping the rest of the community sites about commenting. There was one other comment catching the typo on metrics, but otherwise there hasn't been any further commentary, which I assume silence equals consent. But we will, as we discussed, wait until the end of August. For people to get back from vacation before we vote to finalize anything. In the meantime, I have been writing up a draft sponsorship agreement, which I will be probably sharing with potential sponsors along with our legal, perhaps in parallel. Just I think, you know, before legal, you know, has anything official to say about it, it would be more sort of an advisory discussion kind of exercise with potential sponsors. Just make sure that you know, what I'm sort of proposing and have in mind makes sense for everybody and so forth. At the same time, I am working with Vicky Bresser, who knows the head of the Software Freedom Conservancy, about how we proceed with applying with them to take the project under their and I think that's everything on the legal front for now. Questions? All right, Matt, why don't you jump in with all the myriad wonders of what you've been working on?
Yeah, I am pulling up the Bash lesson actually in the background right now, because I want to kind of show that real quick. Let me start first, though, by going over some of the change logs and things like that. Share my screen first, actually. Share. Everybody see this?
Yep, see your screen, Matt.
Cool. So probably the best place at the moment to get a summary of the changes. A lot of these changes, by the way, won't be a surprise to those on the call because we've kind of talked about these for a little bit. But this is like the high-level summary, and then we'll be doing more blog posts that dive deep into the specifics. But this is sort of the thing that ties them all together. So there's three things that have changed in this particular, I'll say release, but really it's like three different releases that were all timed to go at the same time. But there's three. Let's just say there's like three different distinct efforts that took place that all came to a head last week and are live this week. The first one is that the NRE Labs curriculum itself, and as you guys know, the curriculum is sort of a separate entity. We sort of maintain the NRE Labs curriculum separately from the Antidote platform. Makes sense for a lot of things, such as generally separation of concerns, but also it allows us to keep Antidote kind of pure. Just makes a lot of sense. So what we're doing now is we're doubling down on that actually by separating that out into its own release cycle. So even though it was a separate entity, it was treated very, very much like an Antidote project, meaning when, say, Syringe was versioned to 0.4.0 or 3.2 or whatever it was, then the curriculum was versioned identically. It was 0.3.2. And that had its advantages because, of course, as a result, we knew that that version of the curriculum was compatible with that version of the platform. But one big drawback was that it took, it meant that the release cycle for both was slowed. Basically the curriculum had to wait for the new version of the platform to come out, for that release cycle to finish, or vice versa. And so it was, it was one of those situations where we really couldn't very easily release new content to the curriculum without trying to sort of release everything all at once. And the platform may not have, usually wasn't ready at the time the curriculum was. So we're separating those things out. The curriculum will be developed on its own. It's on its own release cycle. It's on its own version, schema. All of that is totally separate. And we have a lot of work to do in terms of like planning how that actually gets done, because of course you have to, as you're going for, let's say, for the next release cycle for the curriculum, we're going to do like version 1.1.0 or whatever. That plan will have to target a specific version of the Antidote platform now that those two things are separate. So we have a lot of work to do from the planning perspective, but this was the very first big step in doing that. We have a totally separate release workflow just for the curriculum. And there's a bunch of other technical things that we did in the curriculum that make it more stable and all kinds of stuff like that. And that's not to mention the new content that's in the curriculum. Obviously, that's something useful too. So we didn't just this wasn't just a release change. We also introduced a lot of new content, and one of those things is at the request of the Fine Packet Pushers folks was this introduction to Bash, and you can see that this is live now. So this is the lesson that Derek wrote. 3 stages. I think he has the intention of adding 2 more, but that'll go into the next release cycle. For the very first version, this is the Bash lesson as it exists today. And I've gone through it a few times. It's pretty cool. I encourage you all to take a poke at it now that it's live on the NRE Lab site. And if you want to get like I said, I'm planning on writing blog posts to dive into each of these specifically, but if you want to just cheat and take a peek, you can always just look at the change log in any of the repos, any of the important ones anyway. They have a change log where you can see what's new. You can also just go to releases, by the way. That's another thing you can do. It's the same exact content. I actually copy that in our release workflow. I actually just copy that text into this. So you can always just go here and see what's new. So yeah, that's what's different with the curriculum. Like, basically a lot of new content, but also some changes to the actual release workflow that puts new content out there. Hopefully the net of that is that we'll be able to release new content much more rapidly. That is the reason we did this. So much shorter time between, hey, I have an idea, to, hey, I built a lesson and it's been merged into the NRE Labs curriculum repo, to, oh cool, I can see it on the NRE Labs site now. So instead of being potentially weeks or even months between those 2 points, we're hopefully shortening that to days or weeks would be ideal. So that's one thing. Second thing is the Antidote platform itself. As I mentioned, we used to do that in conjunction with the curriculum, but now it's separate. So the Antidote platform version 0.4.0 has been released. There are, of the changes, this is probably the most significant. It's hard for me to say that because I've been working on this release for a few months, and some of the things I worked on were a while ago, so it's hard to. Until I looked at the change log, it was difficult for me to remember just how much has changed in this release. It's a big deal. So if you go to a good way of looking at this, by the way, is Syringe, which Antidote Web is also part of the platform, obviously, but it has a lot of the same. A lot of the changes we made were project wide, basically. So you had to make the changes in multiple projects. So it doesn't really matter which one you look at. So 0.4.0, the 2 big things is this feature here, redesigned endpoint abstraction, and where is it? somewhere. Oh, collections feature. Here we go. Collections feature. So those are the two big things. There's obviously other features and some bug fixes here, but those are the two really big ones. I'll just talk about these very briefly. If you've been in the project for a little bit, you might remember the old format in the lesson definition files where you have to say like there's a key for devices, and then there's another one for utilities, and then another one for black boxes. That was, I'll just admit it, that was really bad. That was a bad abstraction. And it was just really tough to reason about, not to mention it didn't account for endpoints that weren't network devices. And frankly, it didn't even account for network devices that weren't supported by Napalm, which, you know, Napalm supports a lot, but there are some things it doesn't support, in particular, Cumulus. So even though our intentions were to support any network device, our architectural choice at that time actually inadvertently limited us. So what we did was we just said, okay, well, we're throwing that out. We're throwing that model out. What we're doing is we're redesigning the lesson definition so that you just define endpoints generally. There is no utility. There's no type of endpoint. They're just endpoints. That's all they are. From Syringe's perspective, a Linux container that has a few Python libraries installed is no different from a container that's got a 4 gig RAM VM running in it. Doesn't really matter. And that is true not only for the way that basically those images are represented, but also how they're configured. So this is one of the biggest problems with getting an image like Cumulus into Antidote was, again, when you move between stages, you reconfigure all of your endpoints. So you have Junos configs in your lesson directory. Well, Cumulus isn't supported by Napalm, and so that entire idea of configuring Cumulus between stages just wasn't going to work. We just didn't have the ability to do that. Not to mention, there's a myriad of use cases that kind of require that you should be able to make runtime configuration changes to anything. Like a good example is like if you have just like a basic Linux container and you want to teach somebody how to troubleshoot a script, and so in between your stages, you do something to that script, or you maybe change a dependency, or any number of things. You want to be able to modify. You want to be able to make configuration changes to anything in your lesson, not just network devices. So that was the big reason why we redesigned this. Not only was it a pretty bad abstraction to begin with, so we simplified it, but we also made it so that you can apply configuration changes to any endpoint in your lesson. Doesn't matter what it is. We still support Napalm, so there's a way to do that. If you go to the docs, a good way of getting a snapshot of as to how this works now is by going to the docs. If you go to if you go to Antidote platform, curricula, lessons, and then endpoint configuration, you'll see we have a number of configuration options. You'll see that Napalm's still supported. So, obviously if you do have network devices, that's a very useful option to have. No need to reinvent that wheel. So we'll just keep using Napalm. And the way that you do that is you specify in your endpoint, you say configuration type, Napalm hyphen, and then the driver for the Napalm driver for that device. So if it's a Junos device, you'll say Napalm hyphen Junos. If it's an EOS device, you'll say Napalm hyphen EOS. That string is passed directly to Napalm. So we're not screwing with that. However, you have two new options that currently, or that didn't exist before, and that is Python and Ansible. So just like if you have Napalm selected, Syringe will expect that you have a network configuration named, like say if you have a network device dqfx1.txt, that's what that will need to be named. Similarly, if you want to just simply write a Python script, then you say like dqfx1.py. And then, sky's the limit there. Like you can kind of do whatever you want in that Python script. It doesn't really matter. Syringe is just going to execute it. So the onus is on you to write the Python script in a way that does the configuration changes that you expect. Same thing with Ansible. If you have an Ansible playbook that makes the changes that you want to make, you just put it in the directory and Syringe will run it on your behalf. And again, the reason we did this was because not everything runs Napalm. Certainly not every generally not every endpoint, like if you just have regular Linux containers, but even some network devices aren't supported by Napalm. So we just wanted a lot more of a robust capability here. So definitely dig into that. The other thing that we changed in the endpoint abstraction is the way that endpoints are presented to the front end. So again, the old abstraction, if you wanted to show something in the UI, you had to declare it as a network, as a device or a utility. You had to put it in the right bucket, basically. If you didn't want it to show up at all, you had to put it in this like weird, arcane, hardly documented bucket called black box, which was a cool name, but whatever. That whole mess was not appropriate. So what we did instead was we said, okay, for every endpoint, regardless of what it is, you need to declare a list of what we call presentations. And those presentations are very simple. They just need three things. You got the name, just name it. Like, if it's a CLI, call it that. It's sort of a human. It's totally up to you. Human readable thing. Port. So what port do we need to actually use to access this? And then type. So we have currently SSH and HTTP supported. SSH is exactly what you've seen thus far. Terminal in the browser all the way to the endpoint, and it just connects. That's status quo. However, this was one of the reasons we built this feature was because we actually did support the ability to show some sort of like a web UI if your endpoint was showing a web UI. And we actually kind of supported that, but in the old abstraction, it was horrendous. And I never talked about it because I was ashamed of how it was implemented. So this was another thing I tackled in this change. So if you have, say, Stackstorm is a great example. Our Stackstorm container, I'm actually working on a lesson that takes advantage of this. Stackstorm has both a web UI and a CLI, and so it would be useful to show both. So on one tab, you have the terminal with the Stackstorm with a bash shell that's got Stackstorm installed. That's sort of status quo. But in addition, you can have another tab to the same endpoint, by the way. It's not two different endpoints, to the same exact endpoint that's showing the web UI in an iframe. And the only thing you have to do in order to make that work is by declaring it as an HTTP presentation. And this is a little bit of a typo. You wouldn't obviously use port 22 for that. You'd use 443 or something like that. So this is pretty cool. I'm excited about this. I feel a lot better about the endpoint abstraction now, and I'm going to be explicitly writing, the lessons that I work on personally, I'll be incorporating these features. That way people have sort of reference examples to pull from. The second big feature in the platform is collections, and this one's a lot easier to summarize, to talk about quickly. We've always wanted to, let's just say categorization in NRE Labs has been and will probably continue to be a moving target. We're always thinking of new ways to categorize content, but that's mostly from a technical perspective. So like right now, if you remember, we've got like fundamentals, tools, and workflows. That's certainly useful. We're not suggesting that we're going to throw that out. We just feel like we want to add to that. There's more detail to be sussed out there. But from a non-technical perspective, there's also some other categorizations that are useful. And I'll just give you a little bit of a history. We as in, I putting my Juniper hat on for a second here. I work for Juniper. There are Juniper specific things in here, and in particular, the JSnappy lesson. While an extremely useful tool and it's open source, it does only work on Juniper. And I wanted to make sure that people understood that. I wanted to make sure that people could understand that this was sort of something that you can only get from a Juniper perspective, even though it focused on something higher level. It's just sort of disclosing the limits of that particular tool, and I would expect that of any lesson really. Obviously, we're not, the intention is not to just load that collection full of Juniper content. It's just to have a place for the stuff that's already there. And similarly, we have other folks that want to contribute lessons that we might want to attribute that content to as well. For instance, the Network to Code guys and Twin Bridges, which is Kirk Byers' company, they create tools of their own, and we want to provide a home for those things. And so what we did is we built this idea of collections, and collections are pretty simple. It's a way of effectively, first off, creating a kind of a home page where you can go to learn more about some sort of entity that's involved with NRE Labs. Now, I imagine that sponsors of the project will sort of implicitly have a collection, but that doesn't mean it's not a one-to-one relationship. Not every collection, being in a collection doesn't automatically make you a sponsor. It's a way of housing a particular piece of content, or at the very least, just linking to additional resources. So that's the big thing for us right now is there's a ton of content on Packet Pushers for learning this stuff. If you go to Network to Code guys, they've got all kinds of content on their site, but of course their strength is in actually holding classes. Same thing with Kirk, although a little bit more focused on Python. And we're not, Entry Labs was not invented to replace all of the existing training. It's meant to augment it. So it would be stupid if we didn't find a way to link to those folks. And so that's what we've done. So collections are it's a kind of a new categorization tool that's leaning on the sort of like more non-technical side of things. If you do build lessons and you want those lessons to be placed in your collection, you'll see that the two lessons that we have right now that use Juniper open source tools like JSnappy and PyEZ, what I did was when these lessons were created, there's a little tag in the lesson definition that says collection ID. And the collection ID for Juniper is 1, and then, basically, so you find your collection and then you identify the ID and you put it in that field, and the platform will do all the work of populating this page with information. So pretty excited about this. This is a way for us to basically link to other resources for, so sort of for next steps. And I think it'll help also get folks involved because, if they, a good example is the Network to Code guys or Kirk, where, they say, hey, we've got all these folks or all these offerings from an automation perspective. We want to get the word out about what we're doing. And so what they might do is for the tools that they maintain, they may give like a sneak preview or a sort of a 101 level lesson, and they'll build that into Entry Labs, and then we have a call to action at the bottom that says, hey, check these guys out, and they'll point to the collection ID for follow-up. That's the ideal goal in my mind.
Yeah, it's very cool,
So
Matt.
I'll pause. Yeah, go ahead. I've been blabbering. Please ask questions.
No, just yep. I'm here listening and seeing what you did, and it makes good sense. And it's a nice framework to have for whoever else comes along and participates in such a way that a collection is appropriate. You just made it easy, so looks really good.
Yeah, cool. And just I'll put the cap on this. Just like everything in Entry Labs, it's all stored as code. In fact, the collections are actually in the repo alongside the curriculum. So if you go to the Entry Labs curriculum, you can see the collections actually has its own directory. We have a bunch of like POC collections in here. We probably should delete because we were playing with it, but they're not live anyway. There's a field in the collection definition, just like in lessons, for tier. So they're all at PTR right now. None of them are actually in production, except for the 4 I just showed you. So yeah. So anyway, what I'm trying to get at there is that they're all stored as code, and of course we can change anything just like we would change a lesson. So if you have anything you think should be added or changed, it's all totally editable as if it was a lesson. Going back to my blog post, I'll be brief here because it's I don't know, it's pretty simple to just say. We've migrated, so we still have a presence in Google Compute. If you've been around the project for a little bit, you know that we've been running in Google Compute for a while. That's still true, actually, and still will be true for a lot of our sort of supporting services. But for the primary Kubernetes cluster that powers this in production, that powers the Entry Labs site, we've actually moved to a new bare metal as a service provider called Packet. I talked about them on the Datanauts show, Ethan. So that's done. They're awesome, and the servers that we ordered from them are actually cheaper than the VMs that we've been using from Google Compute. So the Google Compute, what we got from them is effectively big ass VMs with a lot of RAM, and as is typical with a lot of instance types in public cloud, the core speed was kind of meh. Like it wasn't very fast. So what we did with Packet was we selected a server type that was actually like double the core speed almost, but then a lot less RAM, because we actually don't need that much RAM. We're aggressively garbage collecting old lessons. When you start a lesson, that sort of starts a 30-minute countdown of an activity. If you refresh the page, that countdown gets restarted, and there's a few other things that restart the countdown. But generally, after 30 minutes of an activity, your lesson gets cleaned up. So in terms of like RAM to run stuff, we don't actually need that much because we clean stuff up pretty regularly. It's all automated, part of the platform. And so what we really needed was core speed. And so we selected a server type that optimized for those sort of 2 design goals. And as a result, the per node price was actually 15 cents lower than the big ass VMs we were paying for before, which is cool. So we get a better experience and it's cheaper. And it's bare metal, so it's not VM. So nested virtualization, the penalty, there's always a penalty associated with that, even if you're using hardware acceleration, which we were. But even so, there's a penalty, and we're avoiding that now. I will tell you, I'll just show you, why not? We're gathering telemetry about the way that the platform is performing all the time. You know, we of course, we don't gather any personally identifiable information, but we do gather generally like how the platform is working. And I think this is, actually, let me zoom out because I think this is too far forward. Yeah, there we go. Hold on, it's loading. It's pulling all the data. So these are the two graphs that I look at. There's a few graphs I need to add. This is a new Grafana instance that I stood up. I have yet to finish configuring it for myself. But if you look in, let's see, this is that's the 11th. Oh man, I'm way off. Let me actually zoom even further out. Let me just do last 24 hours. There we go. That's better. So now let's zoom out, see if we can get like the beginning of the week. So one change, we've only started gathering some of this data, but basically one change that you'll notice is that the load times are a little faster. So if you look at the history here, you'll see load times are a little faster for lesson loads. Let me get this big spike out of the way so you can see that. There we go. So this was the old, and right about here is where we migrated InfluxDB. So this is where we actually made the change. You'll see the load times are a little faster, maybe not quite halved, but kind of close. And of course, this is totally, I need to do some filtering here because obviously there are lessons in here that don't have like network devices, and those are going to be fast kind of no matter what. So I got to do some filtering here. But if you just kind of squint your eyes a little bit, you can see that the lesson load times are a little faster. But what more importantly in my mind is they're more consistent. So there's a lot less variability in the load times. So what I'm hoping to do is compile some reports once we've gathered enough data for like a week. It's only been a few days, so I want to get more data than this. But I'm pretty sure we'll be able to see at least some sort of performance improvement. Just visually, I can kind of see that it's a little better, but I want to get more data first off, and then I also want to clean it up so that there's not so much noise. But load times, that's been one of the things that we've been trying to figure out how to optimize for, and this is, I think, a really good step in that direction.
So Matt, is this all going down the road of scale as this ramps up as well? Kind of getting out in front of these problems now, and then looking ahead to when this is going to be more load on the system if this all takes off.
For sure, yeah. And same, by the way, the syringe redesign that I talked about on Datanoff is another example of that. Like there's not a big constraint on usage right now, but especially as I'm waiting for that hacker news moment, basically. So yeah, we're trying to do a lot of things while we have the time and while we have the bandwidth to tackle them. And moving to Packet, honestly, was a lot easier than I thought it would be. I just had to, moving away from like Google Compute, well, any public cloud, really, they want you to use all their services. Packet's way simpler. They don't even have really services. They have servers. That's about it. They have a few other things on top, but it's nothing like a public cloud where you can have like, the GCP load balancer and all of that stuff. So migrating to Packet meant sort of making the infrastructure a little bit more heterogeneous. So we're using Cloudflare up front for load balancing and a few other things like that instead of, everything under one roof. But yeah, generally that's the reason we're doing a lot of this stuff is A, to improve the experience now, and also B, to effectively pay down the technical debt while we don't have that much interest accrued. And that's it. That's really it. Please, feel free to read the rest of the blog post. Like I said, I covered everything that I talk about in the post, but some of the details might be useful to you. Change logs have all the details of like what PR is introduced to which features. If you want to look at the code, if you want to look at the comments, all of that stuff's there. And yeah, and I'll be writing more blog posts, doing a little bit of travel actually over the next 3 weeks, but I do have some gaps. So hopefully I'll be able to release some blog posts in the next few weeks that covers each of these things in much more detail. Some pretty pictures.
Thanks for the RSS feed that's on there, Matt. I just added that to my Feedly, and I will get this blog post shared in the Packet Pushers Weekly newsletter, Human Infrastructure Magazine, to help spread the word about the big update.
Awesome. Thanks, dude. So yeah, that's it for me. Any other questions or anybody? Let's just open the floor. Anybody want to talk about anything or ask questions about something? Bueller.
All right. Well, we can. I mean, we can sit here for another 25 minutes if we really want to, but we can.
It'd be like my teachers in high school. It's like we'll sit here. I don't care. I have time.
No, I mean, if everybody's got what they need for the week, then cool. And I think. Thank you for putting the blog into the newsletter, Ethan. And then I think Drew is back next week, and he'll publish the batch stuff.
Yes, exactly. He's out this week, and I'm covering for him as best as I can, just proving challenging. But yeah, we will definitely get that collection and the bash lessons promoted too.
All right, sounds good. All right, onward and upward.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining. We'll see you next week.
See everybody later. Bye-bye.